I turned 27 and got a text from Dad. Hope you had cake or something. No call. No visit. A week later, he sent another. We're throwing Mom's retirement party. $2,500 per person. I was invited, but only his wallet. No one mentioned my birthday. No one asked how I was. I didn't respond. I just stopped the $3,000 I'd been sending every month, covering their mortgage, insurance, and repairs while they took over my house. My sister took my bedroom. My parents took my peace. When I asked for 1 week alone, Dad scoffed. You're being selfish. That night, I decided to transfer the deed. I, 32M, turned 27 5 years ago, and that's when everything changed. That birthday text from Dad still burns in my memory. Hope you had cake or something. No call. No visit. Just those 6 words that somehow managed to sum up exactly how much my existence meant to him. I stared at that message for maybe 10 minutes, sitting alone in my apartment with a grocery store cupcake I'd bought myself. The candle had already burned down to nothing while I waited for a phone to ring that never did. 27 years old, and I was still that kid hoping his parents would remember he existed. A week later came the real slap. Dad texted again. We're throwing Mom's retirement party. $2,500 per person. Just like that. Not, would you like to come? Or we'd love to have you there. Just the price tag. I was invited, but only as a wallet. The worst part? Nobody mentioned my birthday. Not during the party planning. Not when I didn't respond to the invitation. It was like those 27 years of life had never happened. Mom's retirement was worth celebrating with champagne and catered food, but my birthday wasn't worth a phone call. I'd been sending them $3,000 every month for 3 years by then, covering their mortgage, home insurance, and every repair that came up. They'd moved into my house after I'd worked my ass off to buy it, saying they needed help with their finances. I was living in a cramped studio apartment across town, paying their bills and my rent, while my sister took over my bedroom and my parents took over my peace of mind. The house had been my pride. I'd saved for 5 years, working 2 jobs through college and living off ramen just to scrape together that down payment. It was supposed to be my fresh start, my proof that I'd made something of myself despite growing up feeling invisible. Instead, it became their retirement plan. Every time I asked for just 1 week alone in my own house, Dad would scoff and tell me I was being selfish. Family helps family, he'd say, as if I hadn't been helping for years while getting nothing but criticism in return. When I mentioned feeling overwhelmed, he'd remind me how much they'd sacrificed raising me, conveniently forgetting that he'd missed most of my childhood working late or drinking with his buddies. My sister had settled into my old bedroom like she belonged there, redecorating with my parents' blessing and treating me like an unwelcome guest whenever I visited. She'd roll her eyes when I came by to fix something or drop off more money, making little comments about how I was finally contributing to the family after all these years. That retirement party invitation was the last straw. I could picture it perfectly. Me writing another check while everyone else celebrated Mom's freedom from work, pretending I was part of the family when really I was just the bank account they occasionally remembered to thank. I didn't respond to the invitation. Instead, I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I stopped sending money. That first month without the $3,000 transfer, my phone exploded. Mom called crying about the mortgage payment being late. Dad left angry voicemails about responsibility and family obligations. My sister sent passive-aggressive texts about how disappointed she was in me for abandoning them when they needed me most. But I wasn't abandoning them. I was finally seeing clearly. For 3 years, I'd been subsidizing their lives while barely scraping by myself. I'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so they could order takeout in my house. I'd been working overtime to cover their expenses while they treated me like an inconvenience whenever I showed up. The calls kept coming for weeks. Dad tried guilt, anger, and eventually bargaining. He promised they'd do better, that they appreciated everything I'd done, that we could work something out. Mom sobbed through phone calls about losing the house, about how cruel I was being to my own family. But I remembered that birthday text. Hope you had cake or something. 6 words that showed exactly how much I mattered to them when there wasn't money involved. 3 months into my financial boycott, I got a call from Dad that was different. His voice was shaky, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. The bank was threatening foreclosure. They'd burned through their savings trying to cover the payments I'd been making, and now they were out of options. He asked if we could meet to discuss things like adults. Said he realized they'd taken me for granted and wanted to make things right. For a moment, I felt that old familiar hope rising in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe they finally understood. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. Dad looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went deeper than just missing sleep. He ordered his coffee black and sat across from me like we were negotiating a business deal instead of trying to repair a relationship. He apologized. Actually used the word sorry, which was more than I'd gotten in years. Said they'd been wrong to take advantage of my generosity, that they should have appreciated me more. Mom wasn't there. She was apparently too emotional to handle the conversation, but Dad assured me she felt the same way. Then came the real reason for the meeting. They wanted to work out a payment plan. Something more sustainable, he said. Maybe $2,000 a month instead of $3,000, with a formal agreement about boundaries and respect. I listened to his whole proposal, watching him gesture with his coffee cup and avoid making eye contact when he talked about family loyalty. When he finished, I asked him a simple question. When was my last birthday? He stared at me blankly. Actually had to think about it, counting on his fingers under the table like he was doing math. Eventually admitted he wasn't sure of the exact date, but thought it was sometime in spring. It was September. My birthday was September 15th, the same date it had been for 32 years. I stood up from that coffee shop table and walked away without saying another word. Dad called after me, asking what my birthday had to do with anything, but I kept walking. He still didn't get it. After everything, he still saw me as a financial resource, not a son. That night, I made the decision that would change everything. I called my lawyer and started the process to transfer the deed. Not to them. They'd proven they couldn't handle that responsibility. Not to my sister, who'd treated my generosity like an entitlement. I transferred it to someone who would appreciate it, who understood its value because they'd never had anything handed to them. My cousin Jake had been struggling since his divorce, working 3 jobs to keep his kids housed and fed while his ex-wife fought him for every dollar. He was good people, the kind who'd helped me move furniture and never asked for anything in return. When I offered him the house at half its market value, with owner financing at a rate he could actually afford, he cried. The legal paperwork took 2 months to finalize. During that time, I didn't tell my parents what I was planning. Let them sweat about the foreclosure. Let them scramble for solutions that didn't involve treating me like their personal ATM. Dad called twice asking if I'd reconsider the payment plan. Said he'd talked to Mom about being more appreciative, that they could have a proper birthday celebration for me next year. Too little, too late, and still focused on what they could get from me rather than what they'd failed to give. The day the deed transfer became official, I drove to the house one last time. My house. Soon to be Jake's house. I had a key made for the new locks I'd had installed, and I left it on the kitchen counter next to an eviction notice. 30 days. That's what I gave them to find somewhere else to live. Mom called within an hour of finding the notice, screaming through tears about how I was destroying the family. Dad got on the line and threatened to sue me, said I couldn't just throw them out of their home. I reminded him whose name was on the deed, whose money had been keeping them afloat, whose birthday they'd forgotten just 3 months earlier. My sister was the worst. She accused me of being vindictive, of taking out childhood grudges on innocent people. Said I was punishing them for not being perfect parents, as if forgetting my birthday was just a small oversight instead of a symptom of 32 years of indifference. But the most satisfying call came from Dad's brother, my Uncle Mike, who'd heard about the situation through family gossip. He wanted to tell me he was proud of me for finally standing up for myself, that he'd been watching my parents take advantage of me for years and wondered when I'd finally have enough. Uncle Mike knew about the missed birthdays, the broken promises, the way they'd always treated me like a backup plan instead of a priority. He'd seen how they'd moved into my house and acted like they'd done me a favor by accepting my help. He understood what I was really doing, not just evicting them, but evicting myself from a family dynamic that had never served me. The 30 days came and went faster than I expected. Jake moved in with his kids and started making improvements immediately, treating the house with the respect it deserved. My parents found a small apartment across town, funded by Mom's actual retirement savings and Dad's part-time consulting work. They could have afforded it all along. They'd just preferred using my money instead of their own. Update 1. 6 months have passed since I transferred the deed. The family drama has mostly settled into a cold war of silence, which honestly feels better than the constant phone calls and guilt trips. Jake loves the house. He sends me pictures of the garden he planted and the treehouse he built for his kids in my old backyard. Seeing those updates makes me happier than 3 years of mortgage payments ever did. That house is finally being lived in by people who appreciate it, who see it as a home instead of a free ride. My parents adjusted to their new reality faster than I expected. Turns out they were perfectly capable of managing their own finances when they had to. Dad picked up more consulting work, and Mom started a small business selling crafts online. They're not struggling. They're just living within their means for the first time in years. The silence from my family felt strange at first. No more crisis calls about broken appliances or late bills. No more guilt trips about family obligations or demands for money. I kept checking my phone, expecting the emotional manipulation to resume, but it never did. Instead, I started building the life I'd put on hold while funding theirs. I moved into a bigger apartment, started dating again, even took a vacation without worrying about whether I could afford to send them money. For the first time in years, my paycheck belonged to me. The only family member who stayed in touch was Uncle Mike. He'd check in every few weeks, updating me on family news and making sure I was doing okay. Through him, I learned that my parents had started telling people I'd abandoned them, painting themselves as victims of their ungrateful son. Let them have their narrative. I know the truth, and apparently so does Uncle Mike. He told me that several other family members had started questioning my parents' version of events, especially after they showed up to Christmas in a new car despite claiming to be financially devastated by my abandonment. The real test came when Mom's birthday approached. Part of me wondered if they'd reach out, if they'd try to use the occasion to rebuild bridges. But the day came and went without a word from any of them. No invitation to celebrate, no attempt at reconciliation. I wasn't surprised, but I was relieved. It confirmed that I'd made the right choice. Update 2. A year after the deed transfer, I got the call I'd been half expecting. It was my sister, and her tone was different, less accusatory, more desperate. Her marriage was falling apart. Her husband had been cheating, and she was looking at divorce proceedings that would leave her with very little. She needed a place to stay while she got back on her feet, and apparently, our parents' small apartment wasn't an option. She asked if she could move in with me temporarily, just until she found a job and saved enough for her own place. She even apologized for how she'd treated me during the eviction, admitting that she hadn't understood the full situation at the time. I listened to her whole pitch, remembering all the times she'd rolled her eyes at me, all the comments about me finally contributing to the family, all the ways she'd made me feel unwelcome in my own house. I told her no, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. I'd learned that helping family members who didn't respect me only enabled their behavior and damaged my own well-being. I wished her luck finding another solution and ended the call. She tried calling back several times, leaving voicemails that cycled through anger, bargaining, and guilt. When that didn't work, she got Mom involved. Suddenly, I was getting teary phone calls about family forgiveness and second chances. But I'd heard it all before. These weren't genuine attempts at reconciliation. They were strategic moves to get something they wanted. The fact that they only reached out when they needed help proved that nothing had fundamentally changed. I blocked their numbers and moved on with my life. The peace that followed was extraordinary. No more emotional manipulation, no more financial demands, no more walking on eggshells around people who saw me as a resource instead of a person. I started therapy to work through the guilt I felt about cutting ties, and slowly began to understand that loving myself sometimes meant protecting myself from people who claimed to love me. Update 3. 2 years after everything changed, I'm writing this from my new house. Not the one I bought for my parents, but a better one I bought for myself with the money I'd been sending them and the equity from Jake's purchase. Thought I had. The parents I wished they'd been. But I don't miss the stress, the manipulation, the constant feeling that I was never quite good enough to earn their love, but always good enough to fund their lifestyle. The real revelation came 6 months ago when I ran into Dad at a grocery store. We stood in the produce section, two strangers who used to live in the same house, and exchanged awkward small talk about the weather. He looked older, grayer, but not broken. Just ordinary. He asked how I was doing, and I told him I was well. He mentioned that he and Mom were managing fine in their apartment, that my sister had moved to another state after her divorce. Normal family updates delivered with the emotional distance of acquaintances. Then he said something that surprised me. He told me he understood why I'd done what I did, that he probably would have done the same thing in my position. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the father I'd always wanted, someone who could admit mistakes and see situations from perspectives other than his own. But it was too late for that version of him to matter. We finished our small talk and went our separate ways. I bought groceries for one household instead of two, drove home to a house where I controlled the thermostat, and had dinner without anyone commenting on my choices or asking for money. That night, as I sat in my living room with my dog curled up beside me, I realized I'd finally gotten what I'd been searching for my whole life, a family. It just looked different than I'd expected. It was Jake and his kids sending me pictures of their latest home improvement projects. It was Uncle Mike checking in with his weekly phone calls. It was the friends who remembered my birthday without being reminded, who celebrated my successes and supported me through challenges. It was me, learning to be enough for myself. The revenge I'd thought I wanted had transformed into something better, freedom. Freedom from expectations that would never be met, from relationships that drained more than they gave, from the exhausting cycle of hope and disappointment that had defined my family relationships. I'm 32 now, 5 years older than when I got that dismissive birthday text. I've learned that sometimes the most radical act of self-love is walking away from people who refuse to see your worth. That family isn't determined by blood or obligation, but by mutual respect and genuine care. My parents are fine. My sister is rebuilding her life in another state. The house I bought is loved and maintained by people who appreciate it. And I'm finally, genuinely happy. The boy who used to wait by the phone on his birthday, hoping for a call that never came, has grown into a man who doesn't need anyone else's validation to know his worth. Some might call that revenge. I call it recovery.